You get to have the accolades, right? Okay, so here we go. The first thing I want to do is to thank my incredible collaborators. So I think Walter Clark had to scoot out, but we just owe him such a debt of gratitude for making this whole thing happen. And also to my colleague Antoni, who is not here, but is very present. And I want to thank my incredible collaborators in this presentation. So this is Ana de la Paz. I don't need to say much about her because you're going to see for yourself in just a minute. And we also want to thank our third collaborator, Elisabet Torras Aguilera, who was not able to make the trip today, but she also made a tremendous contribution to our research. And I want to note that Aurelia Pesarradona and Maria Jose Ruiz Mayordomo were not able to make it today at the last minute. So I'm sorry about that. I know that we're all very disappointed not to be able to hear their research on the Canario. And when we found that out, we decided, Ana and I, to take 45 minutes. So go to the bathroom if you need to, be ready. Okay. Those of you that know me know that a big goal in my life is to translate Spanish sources to English. And there's just a lot of information in this presentation that we really wanted to get out to you. And I want to note that except for the Esquivel, on whom we rely, of course, on Lynn Brooks, except for Cervantes and the Carpentier quotes, all the translations from the Spanish sources that we're going to give you today are mine. And the research that we're presenting today is from my forthcoming book, Sonidos Negros, forthcoming from Oxford University Press. Look for it next year. Okay. We're going to be speaking today about an early modern Spanish dance called the Villano. Performed in Christmas pageants, this shepherd's dance told the story of a bumpkin shepherd who eventually saw the light of Christ and was redeemed. Because the Villano contains the narrative of redemption, it was also a tool of evangelization and thus of the process of colonization of the Americas. This narrative was staged throughout the New World. We will argue today that despite the Villano's evangelical purpose, we may also delineate the contestations of race, the subversion and resignification of dance language, and resistance to colonization in the Villano and its descendants, such as the Guaracha. We will review the sources for the Villano and consider them in terms of their social context, theatrical performance, aristocratic dancing schools, and popular or street performance. And what we see is a tendency toward differentiated styles of the Villano, making reference to social class. So the aristocratic or more refined style seems to emphasize jumping, whereas the low or more peasant style seems to emphasize percussive footwork. The 17th century Villanos are universally spoken of as having gambetas and zapatetas. That is, gambetas are gambols or jumps, and zapatetas are a hit of the foot, a hit of the hand on the foot of the shoe, jumping at the same time as a sign of joy. Cabrioles and stomps. Unlike percussive, there's more to come. Unlike percussive footwork, jumps became part of a dancer's training in the aristocratic context, so that's a difference. So what are the characteristic steps of the Villano in this more aristocratic context? The boleo is a flying step, it's a cabriole, a high jump with legs beating and the body rotating in the air. It's very difficult and it requires training. The puntapié is a jumped kick, which is characteristic of the Villano's unique bow. And we will relate this step to the bacunao, which is part of a flirtatious dance game that's found throughout the African diaspora. We think of the Guaracha as Cuban, but our earliest source for the Guaracha comes from 17th century Mexico. Cuba and Mexico were, of course, linked by the slave trade. Havana, I don't need to tell you this, was founded as a place to make port with booty on the way back to Europe, and many enslaved Africans made port in Havana before going on to Veracruz and other ports of New Spain. So what we believe that we're seeing in the Guaracha, which is we're going to conclude with, as a syncretism of Iberian, African, and Native American dances, is number one, that noisy Villano footwork / jumping, because we're kind of looking at them together. And these sexy bacunaos are twin aspects of a widely dispersed complex of movement ideas, which Garcia de Leon Griego calls cumbe. And of course, we all know those cumbe dances, right? For example, in the Peruvian zamacueca and Cuban zapateo, footwork seems to stake out the more white or decent side of the spectrum, while the bacunao is always perceived by Europeans as being indecent and black. The other thing we think we're seeing in the Guaracha as a syncretic form is that Africanist dance ideas such as the bacunao and what Constance Vallis-Hill calls drum dances seem to be continually circulating back to the Iberian Peninsula, where we find them in the 18th century tonadillas. And of course, I'm ignorant about all of the incredible, Native American dances, but I'm learning from you, and I know that it makes me wonder whether this work is not also going to yield a lot of insight about, what these presences are on, and we'll give you a little bit of proposals in a bit. Elegua, the gatekeeper, is a divinity known as Legba and as Shu. He is found throughout the African diaspora. He's also found throughout West and Central Africa. He's found in Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico, DR, Panama, Venezuela, Colombia, Haiti, and the United States. Anthropologist Melville Herskovitz says, Legba everywhere dances in the manner of a man copulating, and that is with this pelvic thrust. This is the bacunao of these dance games. And we are going to argue today that Legba is also present in Spanish dances.
Okay, so let's back up and tell you a bit about our research process. In the 16th and 17th century, Spain, footwork was used in two dances, the Canario and the Villano. The Canario's footwork was a representation of Canary Islanders, or as Arbot writes in 1589, kings and queens of Mauritania, or else like savages in feathers dyed to many a hue. The Villano was a representation of villagers or peasants. In the Villano, noisy footwork often represented unself-conscious confusion, the innocent and joyful dance of shepherds. It was often danced in nativity plays and Christmas pageants. As Javier Irigoyen Garcia powerfully argues in his book Pastoral Discourse and Ethnicity in Early Modern Spain, the shepherd, danced in the Villano, has lived in the Spanish imaginary as an emblem of the limpieza de sangre, purity of blood that underlies today's ideas about race. The shepherd is a representation of an idealized community cleansed of cultural and biological traces of Moorish and Jewish Iberia. The shepherd in this portrait is King Felipe III. The theme of the adoration of Christ promoted Catholic catechization of the most humble social classes, including those enslaved. In the context of debates over limpieza de sangre, blood purity, this painting commemorates the decision of Felipe III to expel the Moriscos, Spanish subjects of Muslim lineage whose families had converted to Christianity, which was carried out in 1609. The Spanish-Portuguese tambo, anglicized as sambo, was, in the system of racial categories that governed Spanish colonial society, a person of mixed African and Amerindian heritage. Flamencos find this interesting because we have great Roma artists whose nickname is Sambo, Los Sambos from Jerez.
The word zapateado comes from the word zapato or shoe. In the first monolingual dictionary of Spanish, Sebastián de Covarrubias in 1611 elucidates the metaphorical logic linking noisy footwork with the villano as a paradigm of redemption, defining zapato, spelled zapato, so don't look for it in the Z's, in a lengthy dissertation as the most humble thing there is, worn under the foot, and thus symbolic of the humility and lowliness of Christ the Redeemer. From this association flow a number of somewhat surprising glosses, such as to get into a shoe is to be afraid, and to shoe someone or zapatear someone is to punish him in word or in deed. Zapatear is to dance, hitting the palms of the hands on the feet and the shoes, on the shoes, to the tune of some instrument, and that person is called a zapateador. Zapatetas are those hits to the shoes. Rodrigo Caro, a priest and scholar who around 1626 wrote a book about children's games and folk customs called Días Geniales, also sees zapatetas as synonymous with the villano. Caro quotes Ezekiel's prophecy from the Old Testament, because you have clapped your hands and stamped your feet, rejoicing with all the malice of your heart against the land of Israel. Caro writes that this must have been a dance playing castanets, doing zapatetas and gambetas or capers, as in the villano. Sorry.
Caro took a much dimmer view of the Spanish zarabanda, which at French court became the sarabande, described by Spanish moralist Juan de Mariana in 1583 as being sufficient to inflame even quite well-behaved people, representing in public the most stupid and dirty acts that are done in bordellos, representing kisses and embraces and everything else with the mouth and arms, thighs, and the whole body. It seems that the devil has brought these lascivious dances from hell, and the insolence that in the Gentile Republic was not tolerated is viewed with applause and pleasure by Christians, unconcerned by the ruin of their customs and the sweet poison, for it kills at least the soul of lasciviousness and dishonesty that the youth gently drink. And it is not only one dance, but many, to the extent that it seems there is as great a lack of names as there is a surfeit of dishonesties. Such were the sarabanda, and a huge troop of this ilk, which the ministers of idleness, musicians, poets, and actors invent each day without punishment. We will return to the sarabanda presently. I know, I'm like...
Let's see, can we go like this? Is that better? Okay, in 1739, the Dictionary of the Royal Spanish Academy, RAE, followed Covarrubias of 1611 in defining zapateado as a dance done with footwork, zapateando. RAE defines zapateta with the same meaning as had Covarrubias in 1611, that is, the hit or clap of the hand on the foot or shoe, adding and illustrating this with an example from Cervantes' Quixote, jumping at the same time as hitting the shoe with the hand as a sign of jubilation. So aside from this jubilation in the revelation of the coming of Christ, RAE in 1739 contains 6 definitions of the verb zapatear, all of which can be read through this lens of Christian evangelization, including to hit someone with a shoe, to shake someone up in word or deed, to trip over something or run into something, and in dance to accompany the music by beating the hands together or hitting the hands one at a time on the feet, which are lifted to this end in various postures, always following the same rhythm and most frequently used in the dance called the Villano. RAE gives a Latin definition which means to dance with frequent lifting and striking shoe, and an illustration from Quixote in which Sancho Panza, speaking to Don Quixote, emphasizes the difference between zapateado as a dance of rustic innocence and cultivated aristocratic dances. Sancho says, "In an evil hour you took to dancing, master mine. Do you think all mighty men of valor are dancers and all knights errant given to capering? If you do, I can tell you, you are mistaken. There's many a man would rather undertake to kill a giant than cut a caper. If it had been the shoe fling, Zapateado, you were at, I could take your place, for I can do the shoe fling like a falcon, which is some kind of a falcon, but I'm no good at dancing.
In Spanish performance of the 16th and 18th centuries, the villano and the shepherd, whose noisy confusion gives way to revelation and redemption in nativity plays and Christmas carols, villancicos, is performed using zapateado. In the villancicos, Christmas carols, which are also theatricals performed in churches, there are examples in Spanish literature of both gentlemanly and rude villanos. An illustration of a sacramental villano is a loa, praise song by Agustín Rojas, written between 1601 and 1603. The characters enter and sing and dance a villano, and the loa includes the villano's characteristic estribillo or chorus, a didactic couplet about the Eucharist. Hoy al hombre se lo dan, a Dios vivo en cuerpo y pan. Today is given to man, God alive in body and bread. Illustrious Spanish theater historian Emilio Cotarello y Mori cites a 1618 account of a fiesta in which this estribillo appears with villano substituted for hombre. Al villano que le dan, etc., which Cotarello calls el letra tan zapateado, a verse often done with footwork. Cotarello gives another common variation on this estribillo from Luis Briceño's 1626 treatise on Spanish guitar. Al villano que le dan la cebolla con el pan. The villager is given onions with his bread. The estribillo easily acquires a sarcastic tone, commenting not on the miraculous gift of redemption, but rather on the fact that villanos must work for their bread and may not have enough to eat. In her magisterial Nuevo Corpus de la Antigua Lírica Popular Hispánica, siglos XV a XVII, for example, folklorist Margit Frenca La Torre lists another couplet from Briceño's 1626 villano. Al villano testarudo danle pan y azote crudo. To the hard-headed villano, they give bread and a good beating.
But let's get back to our sources. The earliest villano we found is in Cesare Negri's treatise Le Gratie de Amore from 1602. While early modern Spanish dances such as the zarabanda, chacona, and canario were widespread in European courts, the villano was not. However, Negri's villanico was danced in his school in Milan, which from 1550 to 1602 was under Spanish domination. In 1642, we find information about the villano in Juan de Esquivel's Discurso sobre el arte del danzado. While most of the aristocratic dances treated in Esquivel's discursos begin with a courtly and elegant bow, Esquivel describes the villano's unusual opening bow, in which the dancer, having removed his hat from his head with two hands, kicks his leg up to touch the hat before returning the hat to his head and his leg to the floor. Esquivel describes a spectacular jump, the boleo or boleo, as a puntapié. The boleo, characteristic of the villano, is a kick done by lifting the foot as high as possible and stretching the legs well. Esquivel says that the boleo is performed flying through the air. Lynn Brooks translates boleo as a hurtling step, a flying leap turn, about which Esquivel colorfully remarks that some have knocked themselves flat on their backs attempting this feat, and that while performing this step, one adept kicked a lamp hanging 2 handspans above his head. And you can see in this illustration from 1602 Negri that here's a dancer practicing to get his leg higher and higher by kicking a tassel, and the tassel's raised higher and higher until it's 2 handspans above the head.
So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the boleo and the discovery about the step and the difficulty about it. So we were looking at Esquivel and in describing this rotated beat step that is, the leg kicked super high. And we were in the studio, and it was described as a step, and I'm going to try to demonstrate. So I'll do it without the microphone. So you're supposed to lift off the left leg, kick the right leg in the air, jumping, beating, so beat like this, and then rotate. And the first time we were reading it, Elisabet.
And this is, okay, not me, but her. Look at her. And also, the other dancer that was in the studio with us is also a highly trained, balletically trained dancer.
So we were looking at this, but we were like, how do you beat? And in fact, they were saying beat and maybe even cross. So I'm beating like this, and I'm meeting my left leg under my right, and then rotating. All at the same
And they
time.
said it could go 360, like it could go all the way around.
Baroque dance where you do that is a step of 3 counts, where on the count of 1, you leap onto 1 foot, turning halfway, and then you leap halfway on that same foot and turn back where you came, and then leap forward on the other foot.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, okay. All right, so Lynn Brooks says that a puntapié for esquivel is a vacío, or a kick. It's kind of like a battement. RAE defines a puntapié as a hit given with the toes, and we think that the salient difference between a vacío and a puntapié is that the puntapié hits something like a tassel or like the hat. Puntapié seems to be a more generic term for a jumped kick, while the boleo described by esquivel is much more difficult, as we saw, and involves a rotation of the body in the air. Brooks thinks esquivel's boleo may be similar to the Italian salto del fioco, which we've learned so much about from Linda Tomko's work, recorded in Genaro Magri's 1779 chapter on cabrioles. And just to note for those of you who are not familiar, this is a treatise for professional dancers. This 1779 is for professional dancers. So these capers and cabrioles are intricate jumps performed by crossing or passing the legs in the air. They're very difficult and require strength and training, and are often used as a competition among dancers for the greatest agility and strength. Esquivel and Minguet, who we'll meet in just a minute, have 3 and 4 versions of the cabriole respectively, and the Italian and French sources have similar descriptions as well. These jumps are reminiscent also of the Basque folk dances, which click the heels in the air and which are also a test of virility and strength. And we have no idea whether there's any relationship here, but the Basques do pride themselves on the purity of their blood. And that the fact that the Islamic armies that invaded the peninsula in 710 never made it up that far. Cotarello references a chronicle of a visit from the Prince of Wales to Spain in 1623, describing a lavish party in his honor where many cabrioles were performed in competition, followed by dancing with castanets.
In view of the racialized overtones of the Villano's narrative of redemption, we thought it fascinating to note that while the jumps are associated with the innocent joy of shepherds, the word capriole derives from the word cabra, or goat. In Spain, to be como una cabra is to be crazy, but the goat also has a sinister layer of meaning. In medieval occultism, the goat is a lascivious animal representing the devil. For Christians, the goat is a symbol of the Antichrist, as depicted in Goya's painting, which is Sabbath of 1798. Domingo González, a contemporary of Esquivel, also contains a Villano choreography. His treatise, which Ana Yepes dates to 1650, was written as an instruction manual for distinguished gentlemen, thus confirming the fact that the Villano was danced by the aristocracy. In the opening bow, the dancer takes his hat off, stomping the floor with the left foot, while holding the hat and doing a puntapié with the right foot, kicking the hat. González includes castanets in his choreography of the Villano, and he specifies that they are played with the arms low without movement.
I'm going to take you through this process just a little bit. We agreed, Ana and I agreed, that it was not necessary to the narrative that we're presenting today, but we thought it might be fun for you, and we thought it was very fun. So this is like a moment in a window into our process. So the last conference that we did, the work I did with Thomas Baird, we looked at jaque, which is a manual. Literally, a manual comes from the Spanish word mano, or something that you would have in your pocket when you're in the studio, like to record the dances. So this was a manual written in 1680 for a Spanish aristocrat. And I knew from my work the last time that jaque has a villano. So that was the first place we went. We looked at Jaque's Villano of 1680, and we're reading through it, and we don't find this boleo, we don't find the puntapié, we don't find this kind of characteristic bow of the villano that Esquivel tells us we're supposed to look for. So we actually asked Ana Yepes about that, and she said that that jaque is kind of an overview. He gives us kind of an overview that might be for an aristocratic, dance student, and it might be something done on a theater stage. So he sort of combines a lot of different characteristics of the villano, and that's what we see. So we got a little bit disenamored of jaque at that point. And I knew from Ruiz Mayordomo and from Yepes that this Gonzalez manuscript of 1650 existed. And guess what? I found it online. So that was the first big thing. And then I'm reading through this manual, and I see that it has a villano. So that was the second big thing. Okay, and then here we are. So now you can picture we're in the studio in New York, and we're all three huddled over this thing, right? And trying to figure out what it says. So I'm going to read this to you. Advertencia, a la cortesía en este tañido y no en otro, se quita el sombrero con entre ambas manos, aún, we don't know what this word is, dando antes y al principio del tañido una patadita, thank you, en el suelo con el pie siniestro, volviendo el perfil izquierdo delante, quitándose el sombrero, levantando este otro pie de punta a pie y dando con la punta de él en el sombrero, okay? Okay, so, and I'm going to show you like how hard this, I mean, you can.
Tiempo, the word we don't know is tiempo.
It's tiempo? Yeah. Oh my God, thank you, Craig. You see, it takes a village. Thank you, Craig. Okay, so I'm going to just show you, I thought this would be charming to show you this page of our notes. Advertencia, la, can't figure out what that is, co, can't figure out what that is, en este tañido no en otro se quita el sombrero con entre ambas manos. So we deciphered this. It says, in this music and not in any other, you take off the hat with two hands. So that was promising. Dando antes y al principio del tañido una patadita en el suelo con el pie siniestro, volviendo el perfil izquierdo. This is my comment to Elisabet. Thank you, because it might be an indication of it being a theatrical dance. So you turn your profile to who, right? Y quitándose el sombrero. Thanks, Ana, for figuring out what that little plus sign and the arrow meant to look in the margin for that note. Levantando este otro pie de punta a pie, or does this go with the next line? Y dando con la punta de él en el sombrero sosteniendo sobre el otro. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, so there we have 1650, Domingo Gonzalez. We have this punta a pie that Esquivel tells us is characteristic of the villano. Okay, so the González villano is titled Villano Caballero por lo bajo, which roughly translates as gentleman villano in the low style. As Benjamin Liu describes in his work on medieval serranillas, before 1492, when there were encounters between Muslim raiders and shepherds along the Christian-Muslim border in Andalusia, in order to repopulate frontier lands, livestock owners were granted privileges and titles of nobility in exchange for taking the obligation to defend their territories from Muslim raids. Irigoyen adds, these newly minted nobles were called caballeros villanos, commoner knights or nobles, an apparent oxymoron that underscores that the combination of sheep herding and the fight against the Muslim was one of the instances in which the expansion of Christian kingdoms to the south allowed for social mobility. We found it fascinating to learn from González's 1650 Villano Caballero that a generation after the 1609 expulsion of the Moriscos from Spain, this conundrum of gentlemanly villano was the lingua franca of aristocratic dance academies. Our next reference for the villano comes from Pablo Minguet Eiro's 1737 short treatise on Spanish steps. Minguet published these treatises on Spanish dance all the way through the 1760s, and he basically plagiarizes Esquivel for these, so we see the continuity in movement vocabulary from 1642 to 1764. The 1737 edition of Minguet, which is available online from the Library of Congress, gives a complete choreography for a villano. Like González in 1650, Minguet's in 1737 omits the boleo, that was that really complicated turned, rotated cabriole that was described by Esquivel in 1642. But Minguet does include a step called puntillazo, which is a jumped kick similar to the kick to the hat in Esquivel's and González's bow, and which is used several times in the dance toward the end of each variation. Felipe Rojo de Flores' 1793 treatise on recreational dance lists cabriolas or cabrioles, taconeos or heel work, and zapatetas, a hit or slap of the hand on the shoe as we saw, as fundamental elements for the preparation or training for Spanish dance.
Okay, so there's a step in Escuela Bolera and the folkloric dances called the lazos. Okay, yeah. Which are done like this, of interweaving, you know, I mean, I can't really do it really well with on the carpet, but it's this rotation in and out of the feet. Maybe they're like mashed potatoes, I don't know.
Yes, maybe.
Or Charles, yeah. So this interweaving step that I'm pretty fascinated by, that the fact that the Basque dances have these jumped steps that are cabrioles, horizontally they're like entrechats, and vertical, the cabrioles that are vertical, and I one day will go in that direction and research that. But again, these are the interweaving steps that are characteristic of Spanish.
And just for you, Constance, I just want to say that one other thing I'm really proud of about this conference is that I've roped this one into dance scholarship too. Okay, so the 1793 treatise of Rojo de Flores is actually the first mention we saw in a dance manual of the Guaracha. And it's also the first time we saw percussive footwork, taconeos and zapatetas, listed among the formal techniques of Spanish dance training. If Rodrigo Caro in 1626 saw zapatetas as synonymous with the villano, in 1793, Rojo de Flores sees gambetas and cabrioles, or jumping, as equivalent to taconeos and zapatetas, or footwork. And further, he sees all of these interweavings and interlacings of the feet as characteristic of, or even definitive of, Spanish dance. So without venturing an opinion about which came first, the chicken or the egg, and Teresa can tell us about, the 1950s, we would simply note that along with these intricate heel and toe interlacings, these jumps are found in representations of Spanish folk dance today, notably the Basque dances. This is Pedro Azorín.
Jota, yeah, that's the Jota. Our next source for the villano comes from the 1820 treatise by bolero dancer Antonio Cairón. Thank you. Cairón calls the villano a dance that accompanies its music by hitting the hands together and hitting the hands alternately on the feet and sometimes on the ground. One adopts various postures traveling from one spot to another, and sometimes seated on the ground, the feet are lifted in a sort of spasm of anger, patalatilla. This dance belongs to the laborers of the village. For that reason, it is called villano. Cairón also addresses Zapateado in his 1820 treatise, but in relation to the Canario rather than the Villano. The Canario came from the Canary Islands. It was later called Guaracha, and lately Zapateado. The name might change again soon, but the form will not. That is, Cairón sees the Guaracha as a footwork dance, like the Canario and Zapateado. In 1836, the same year that Thomas Rice took his Jim Crow act to London, Doña María Requejo danced La Guaracha at Teatre del Diorama in Havana.
Cairón in 1820 called the Guaracha a footwork dance. Thank you. I think I have to go a little lower. But Casiano Pellicer's 1804 history of Spanish theater calls the Guaracha a lively and dangerous descendant of the zarabanda, that scandalous dance described in 1583 as representing in public the most stupid and dirty acts that are done in bordellos, representing kisses and embraces and everything else with the mouth and arms, thighs, and the whole body. In other words, a dance of sexual pantomime. In Luis Mison's 1761 Tonadilla de los Negros, a negrita gitana, a little black gypsy, and her companions, a black man and a white woman, all three characters are played by white actresses in drag, bailan con taconeo, that is, they dance with heel work. And you can see here, I don't know if my, yeah, okay. The bailan con taconeo, and you can see here negro and negla. Writing negro instead of negro is a centuries-old convention for representing African accented Spanish. It's a representation of blackness. And you should check out Nick Jones's new book on Black Talk. It's interesting, though, because in Villano representations, a dramatic device for showing the epiphany of this Villano is that he comes on speaking incorrect Spanish or Sayagüez, and he ends up, after he gets his epiphany, he ends up speaking correct Spanish. The tonadilla employs a curious word, huachi, as an affectionate reference to the beloved. In flamenco today, this would be gitana mía, primo mío de mi alma, negra, mi negra. This says, negrita gitana huachi, que me robas el alma huachi. Little black gypsy girl, huachi, you have stolen my soul, huachi. RAE gives the derivation of huachi, which can also be spelled huachi, and you see now we're getting a little closer to the word guaracha, as the Chilean Quechua huacha or huachu, which means an orphan or illegitimate child. In his Glosario de Afronegrismos, or a glossary of African Spanish words, the eminent musicologist Fernando Ortiz adds that the word guaricha, now we're really close to guaracha, which he thinks must have been spread by the colonizers, means in Colombia a detestable delicacy. RAE adds that in Colombia and Ecuador, guaricha is a synonym for rabona, a female camp follower, and in Venezuela, a young single Indian woman. In other words, the guarachas on the 18th century Spanish stage seem to be of mixed African and Native American heritage. Ruiz Mayordomo says that they represented the exotic from the Spanish perspective, the New World of the Indies and the Caribbean. In her article on dance in the 18th century tonadillas, Ruiz Mayordomo discusses the guaracha sung by the famous tonadillera María Antonia Fernández La Caramba. Ay, guacharita, que guachara estás, que tu guacharo desguacharza. Ay, little guachara, how guachara you are. Your guacharo does the guachara to you. Try to say that 10 times in a row, right? Ruiz Mayordomo explains the double entendre working here. The author here is making a play on words, alternating the term guacharo, which may mean an orphan, as we saw, or a small animal, but in this context means crybaby or whiner, with esguachar or esguazar, which is to ford a river. That is, Cairón in 1820 tells us that the Guaracha is a footwork dance, the bailan con taconeo that we find in Mison's 1761 Tonadilla de los Negros. But Pericet in 1804 links the Guaracha to the sexual pantomime of the 16th century sarabanda. And that certainly seems to be the implication of these 18th century Guaracha performances of young, vulnerable, exotic, and sexually available women. As Robert Ferris Thompson explains, in the Bacunao dances, the intent is to emphasize life. The opposition of male and female is a sign that the world cannot exist without marriage. That ideal communion is dramatized by the striking of hip against hip and abdomen against abdomen. Standing at the crossroads between life and death, Elegua is the perfect balance of nature, a combination of opposites, like young and old, destructive and constructive. He balances on one foot as he dances. He is the choice that changes man's relationship with the world, making the impossible possible. Cuban musicologist Alejo Carpentier describes these suggestive dances as a vast and motley family, close of kin to the saraband mentioned by the poets of the Spanish Golden Age, always accompanied by the kicking of the apron and the gesture of the lifted skirt, the choreographed pursuit of the female by the male. The latter is an eternal basis and theme of the fandango, and I'll just sort of quickly mention that those of you that know my work, from my Sonidos article in 2014 and from the conference proceedings of the last conference, I argue that in the sevillanas that we all dance, the pasada, which is the step of changing places and which can become very flirtatious if you want it to be, and can even become a chase if you repeat it over and over again, like we do in the last section of the first copla, for example. And of course, this is also the quintessential step, as we discussed in our proceedings from last time. The pasada is also the quintessential step of the 18th century fandango. It's what makes the 18th century fandango so sexy, right? So my argument is that this pasada is a manifestation of this Bacunao movement complex in Spain. In the original Spanish, Carpentier's kicking of the apron is puntapié al delantal. That is, the Bacunao's kicking gesture has the same name as the Villano kick. And we've seen the puntapié al delantal in Spain as well. For example, in an entremés from 1643, the heroine dances to this verse, que briosas van saliendo, oh que bien bailando van, dando al aire castañetas y puntapiés al delantal. How breezily they come out, oh how well they go off dancing, giving castanets to the air and kicks to the apron. So we wonder about, I'm just going to clip this so I can use my hands. We wonder about the uptake of the Guaracha as it returned again to the Iberian Peninsula in the 18th century as a sexy representation of dark-skinned America. We agree with Elisabet Le Guin's brilliant discussion of the Mandingoy in her Tonadilla book that the Guaracha's wobbly and slippery representations of race give us a sense of precariousness and longing that a declining and utterly dependent Spain might have felt toward its rising and soon-to-be independent colonies. In that regard, considering the Bacunao as responding to the highest spiritual and political imperatives of those enslaved throughout the diaspora, and that is to deny abjection and genocide generation after generation, and to affirm the unbreakable continuity and strength of their lineage generation after generation, we wonder whether in the Guaracha's oscillations of identity between Gitana Negra and Amerindian, the Negra Gitana Huachi, like the teetering between sacred and profane love and desire that is the essence of the Bacunao, and also like the Villano, teetering between redemption, he's the shepherd, he's the good shepherd, and he's the cabriole, he's the goat, he's the devil, And of course, the whole fun of the Villano representation, what made him so popular through so many centuries, was that he comes bumbling out onto the stage. He's drunk. He's telling dirty jokes, and talking about how much he wants to eat and drink and stuff like that. And the audience were trying to figure out: is he going to get it? That's the Christ child. Is he going to get that the Christ child has been born? And that's the narrative. In his 1934 History of Mexican Music, eminent musicologist Gabriel Saldívar explained that Afro-Mexican music and dance followed the routes that those enslaved were forced to travel. Saldívar published from his personal collection the earliest guaracha that we know of, which is a guaracha by Juan García de Céspedes, chapel master of the cathedral in Puebla, which is dated in 1674. Would you do me a favor and turn lights off? Yeah. This beautiful song is a Christmas carol. And here's one of our favorite interpretations by Fahmi Alkai, who is a Palestinian Spaniard, Arcángel, who is a famous flamenco singer, and soprano Marivi Blanco. Thank you. And of course, the cabrioles are part of the grotesco or the comique, which is the character dancer. So it's not the noble dancer, it's the character dancer that does these cabrioles.
Does it ever, in all these forms, the woman chase the man? I mean, is it always the woman who is being chased? Is it always the man who really wants to do this?
Well, I want to just say that, and this is something I was thinking about listening to the presentations from earlier. This kind of the way that some people come to flamenco as, maybe supplementing an idiom, supplementing what they're doing in their idiom, like these jaraneros de Nueva York. And people are always drawn to flamenco because of the image of this power of the woman. That's what people love about flamenco. That's what I love about flamenco. So, while it's true that, it's very what do you call it? Split gender-wise. Flamenco tends to be very split gender-wise. The man has his style and the woman has her style, and never the twain shall meet. But certainly, as a soloist, the flamenco dancer has the opportunity to be very powerful. Yeah.
Thank you all for your presentations. They had me thinking the whole time and writing ideas and very evocative and so interesting. I had a couple of questions and suggestions. You guys presented last, so that's what's in my mind. I wanted to mention on Irigoyen, he also talks about, you talked about the erasure of Muslim and Jewish heritage. He also talks about, I can't remember if it's him or if it's somebody responding to him, the fights between the Mesta, which is of course the
Matachines?
No, the Mesta, with someone, oh my goodness.
Guild, sheep herders guild.
There's guild, thank you. guilt is the word I'm
yeah.
looking for.
Oh,
The mixta, and particularly taking on the Roma of that period. So there, I feel like it's my role here to just continue to
Absolutely,
insert
absolutely.
that. So there is also that direct conflict with the Roma as well. There were a couple of other things I wanted to ask and mention. I'd love to take a look at the document that you guys are having trouble with words, and mention also that there's a ton of paleographic support online.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with all of those resources.
Well, when you said yesterday that the Archivo de las Indias is online,
Yeah. Is online. Well, and then, but also there are a ton of documents which actually list very systematically the codified symbols.
Oh, that's great.
Some of what you're having trouble
Tiempo,
with are
yeah.
a whole bunch of
Yes.
these codified.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Will you send
formulas.
those links to me in an email?
Yes.
It was fun to figure it out, though.
And then Dr. Shea, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to just reinforce as my interest in cultural anthropology and ethnography and ethnohistory. I think the idea of what you're saying in terms of dance as an expression and the constant evolution of it, I want to relate it to language and just remind people that it is a cultural expression of the culture of that moment. So regardless of the etymology of the term used to describe it, that should be our only driving force in looking for those origins and looking for those pieces that bring that current dance together. Thank you.
Fascinating work, all of you. I really enjoyed it. But I wanted to say that your work on the Guaracha and the Villano and all that, it's like a puzzle. It's a piece of the puzzle that I was always wondering about, because reading Faustino Núñez, he always mentions the Guaracha and the Habanera and the Tango Americano or Baile de Negros as part of the evolution into what later on became el tango flamenco and the tientos. The thing is, the Habanera is in a 4/4 form, but then these dances were in 6/8 or were like ternary.
Yeah, so can I jump in there? Yeah, and I want to say one thing. This is also for you, Constance, just to say, because you may not know this, but probably a lot of other people do know that the Guaracha, of course, in Cuba becomes blackface. It becomes the Cuban answer to blackface. So, yeah. So just putting that out there. Yeah.
Also, all recordings of tientos, they have the tanguillo, the 6/8.
Right. So. Right. So to answer your second question, Alfonso, that was actually something we were thinking about, because of course we're all very enamored of the 6/8, and the Villano, the Canario does have that 6/8. It has the Himiola, but the Villano does not. The Villano is in 4/4 or something like that. But we decided, we were actually looking. What was it? We were looking at. I don't know. We decided to ignore this problem, but the other thing. Yeah, part of our rationale for ignoring the issue of rhythm was because we really had a lot of this kind of information that was coming from the words and the description, so we wanted to stay with that, but and there just wasn't, obviously we went on way too long as it is, but the other piece of it is that, like, I'm studying Afro-Caribbean percussion right now, and my teacher can just take a 6/8 and he can just morph it into a somewhere middle tanguillo sort of thing, and he can morph it back to a 4 and then morph it right back, and it's like he doesn't really even see it as, so just to say that, and like I have a great quote from Wynton Marsalis, which I think I might have played at that 2012 chord conference, where he talks about swing in American music, and he takes it from American music swing to all the way to the African clave and back again, so kind of through the Cuban and then to the African and back. So we decided that there's a spread there in terms of the rhythm. Yeah.
Early on in the presentation, do you happen to
I can get it to you. It's on my computer.
Isn't it sweet? I love it. Like the little Sancho.
Yeah. I love that image.
Okay, let's see. So, 1, 2.
Could you explain a little bit more about the Elegua connection to the whole?
Well, I mean, Elegua is, in my limited understanding, and I know people in this room know a lot more about this than I do, so I hope that you will correct me where I get into shit. Now I'll pick up the microphone now. My understanding is that Elegua is one of the divinities in these many Africanist religious practices in the diaspora that can be danced with a game of sexual pantomime, or can have those kind of pantomimic movements. And of course, this one was talking about Elegua. Also, there's Gede in the Haitian tradition and Banda, but I don't really know anything about any of this. I just come to this as a complete novice and someone who's interested and trying to be respectful, above all.
The way he presented it seems like the profane version derived from the religious usually is the opposite, because that was a clear-cut example of a contrafacto. You have the profane version, which is the dance, extremely popular dance, extremely popular refrain, and then you have the religious version of that, because it has to be extremely popular in order to deserve to be paraphrased.
Right.
So I just wondered if you did intend to make it like chronological, but then we go
Well, I mean, so I'm like eternally writing this chapter on the 18th century, heaven forbid. And, one of the things about the 18th century is that, with the change of regime in Spain, the change of dynasty, there's this constant kind of oscillation between like talking about these popular dances and music forms and theater itself as being like, okay, we're going to demonstrate our Spanishness here, and then, oh no, this is like going to send you to hell. Well, okay, and the times when theater performances were prohibited, a lot of these villancicos took refuge in the churches. So they really did move back and forth, according to a lot of the sources that I've been reading.
Panama, Berna and Julio Semena and a bunch of other really great folks were showing around. The Guaracha is what I would call a guiro.
A what?
A guiro. Word
Oh.
generation. In fact, there are three. There's the guiro, which they would consider Cuban, but it's scored like. And there's a guira, which is the metal scraper thing, which in merengue. But they call what I would call a guiro, they call a guaracha.
Wow.
So now we've got also this, which might have some imagery as well. And then, like you say, with reference to the Eleanor Hake manuscript, there actually are some studies that trace down where all those are from. And I'm embarrassed, I can't remember her name, but there was a master's thesis. I think the author is McCutcheon. If you write me, I can get it to you. But she went and traced a bunch of them, and I've traced a few more. And there's going to be a new dissertation. I just got put on the committee at UNAM, where the Eleanor Hay manuscript is going to be the source of that.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, with all those explanations of dance steps. So that's
Oh.
and of course there are a whole bunch of French stuff. And there's the Chaconne from the last act of Perse by Lully. There's part of La Mable Vainqueur from Hession by Cambra. There's a part of a Vanessa by Bellini. There's but actually there's a big grab bag of all of these, even Irish and Scottish and English contra dance, because that's the advantage once you learn the steps. You could even change the music or back and forth. That catch it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll lower my hand and
Yeah.
and
I just like to make one comment. Meira,
I enjoyed everything here. It was very enjoyable. I'm a senior dancer, but and I just wanted to make a comment because you mentioned the sevillanas, and I've seen many sevillanas. I've danced many sevillanas, and relating it to a legua. And my husband and I, we had put on a feria de Sevilla, and there were like 100 people there, and they were there was this one couple from Cadiz, and when they danced the sevillanas, it was the first time. I mean, it was breathtaking.
It was so beautiful and so sexy, yeah.
And it was like there was no pantomime, but it felt like, wow, they should have been in a bedroom someplace else because it was so sensual. And I've seen other sevillanas that were passionate, but it wasn't as sensual as this couple that did the sevillanas. So I can imagine also going back maybe to the saraban because, you know, how was it danced, you know, and I'm trying to just imagine it. And actually there was she's from Triana, she's an old school, she has an academy in Triana. Yeah, Academia, but right. And I remember seeing her on a video, and she was going to dance a tango, and I think Miguel Poveda, he was singing, and she said to
Are you talking about
the audience,
Lupi?
"Oh, please, perdóname, you know, I'm going to dance this, and this is like, you might not understand it, but it's the sarabanda." You know, and she was saying, but excuse my movements that I'm going to do.
And I think we probably, I don't know, I don't have my schedule in front of me, so please help me
Okay.
not lose control of time.
It says 11:30 break, and then we come back 11:40. So
Oh, awesome.
So I think we're okay, and Adam, it looks like he raised his hand. So could
Yeah.
this is so fascinating. I don't want to stop it super early. Could we take another one?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great, phenomenal presentations and really fascinating. I'm just wondering whether you have plans in your ongoing research to delve even further back and look at maybe Antico from, let's say, pre-Columbian Spain to look at Juan de Encinas, the Anticos and so on, and what kind of a line you might draw between that body of work and then the more modern meaning of the term.
Well, I mean, as I was saying to Benjamin, you know, when I heard his presentation on the medieval serranillas, it took me onto this whole really interesting exploration of the Pastor Bobo, who is, you know, in these medieval, autos and these medieval representations of the Pastor all the outlines of this character are there, and speaking of competition, like I'm interested in, I'm not quite sure how this is all going to fit together, but I'm interested in the Fiesta de Moros y Cristianos, these kind of staged battles between the Moor and the Christian, because one of my central assertions in my book is that Spain is the seedbed of these of our ideas about race right now, and I think that it starts out against the Jews and the Muslims in the pre-Columbian period, and then it gets transposed with the advent of the Atlantic slave trade and the discovery of the Americas and the colonization of Americas. Spain takes this idea of purity of blood and transposes it onto kind of what we would think of as race, and yeah.
I guess I just made I was so interested in some of the linguistic connections you were making, and like wachi, if it's a Quechua word, it seems like that e at the end is this possessive, like my personal possessive form. So there's some interesting connections there. But the one that sort of jumps out to me is a lay person is the possible connection between Guaracha so
Ah,
that
yeah.
goes back to the, question of skill and humility and footwork and tapaneo and so forth. That
Yeah,
really
yeah,
matters. So there
totally.
might be some even more local, indigenous languages that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, if I can speak to that. You cited Ortiz, his Afronegrismos book. In his 5-volume Los Instrumentos de la Música de Cuba, he has a very extensive and much larger discussion of Guaracha,
Okay,
which he directly cites Guaraches
okay, yeah.
as being the origin of the word. That's the first thing. Second thing is this. Being in Latin America, every time we look at the Real Academia de la Lengua, the dictionary, it's always wrong. I reacted when they found connection with Quechua, rather outlandish. So my recommendation is that for words like that, you consult Diccionarios de Mexicanismos, Diccionarios de Americanismos, and try to really double check
Okay,
the Real Academia.
thank
They
you.
Basically, their language seems to be Madrid and its surroundings.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you guys, please help me not put my foot in shit, yeah.
So the word sambo means in Andalusia bow leg.
Uh-huh.
So sambo
Also could be that.
it's got dual meanings too.
Right,
So
right.
you have to consider that into account too.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I mention one more thing about, are you familiar with Cervantes' talk about the veil?
See?
Fefeo, the fefeo.
It's a feo, no.
I can't remember which works specifically, but if you remind me, I can tell you, but he's talking about the neguilla and the negrita and he describes them as poor use of Spanish by the Roma.
Huh.
Just
No, there's,
because-
that's, I'm so on, no, I'm so with you about, sorry, I'm supposed to hold this. I'm so with you about the conflation of the Roma. That's, yeah, I'm right there with you. The conflation of the Roma, the Roma become the blacks for Spain, that's what happens. Oh, his name is Nick Jones. Yeah. So again, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Right.